The one reading this. The question was asked so casually that most people in the room expected an equally casual answer. No one knew that within the next few moments, a silence would fall so heavy that it would change everything. No one knew that a single reply would expose feelings that had been buried beneath years of distance, misunderstandings, family pressure, and unanswered prayers. And no one knew that your soulmate had been carrying a truth inside their heart for far longer than anyone imagined. Listen carefully, because this message is not reaching you by accident. There was a gathering taking place. Family members sat around a large table. Conversations flowed easily. Laughter occasionally filled the room. Plans were being discussed. Future possibilities were being considered. Some people spoke about marriage. Others spoke about moving forward. Everyone seemed focused on practical matters. Everyone seemed convinced that life was finally moving in a new direction. But your soulmate sat quietly. They smiled when necessary. They nodded when someone spoke to them. They answered questions politely. Yet deep inside, their thoughts were somewhere else entirely. They were thinking about you. Not because they wanted to. Not because they were trying to. But because no matter how much time had passed, your memory continued finding its way back into their heart. Don't skip. One relative leaned forward and spoke confidently. They had good intentions, or at least they believed they did. They wanted your soulmate to move on. They wanted them to stop holding on to something they could not understand. And then they asked the question: if the right person came along, could you ever love someone else? The room remained calm. At first, most people expected a simple answer. A yes. Maybe a polite maybe. Perhaps even a laugh. Instead, your soulmate looked down at the table. Something changed in their eyes. A memory had appeared. Not a memory of yesterday. Not a memory of last week. A memory of you. They remembered a moment that nobody else knew about. A moment when your presence had made the world feel different. A moment when everything felt possible. A moment they had spent years trying to forget. And suddenly, answering the question became impossible. The room grew quieter. People waited. Seconds passed. Then more seconds. Everyone began noticing that your soulmate wasn't responding. One person smiled nervously. Another shifted in their seat. Someone laughed awkwardly and said, "It's not that difficult of a question." But they were wrong. For your soulmate, it was the hardest question they had ever been asked. Because answering honestly meant revealing something they had hidden from almost everyone. The truth. The truth that despite all the distance, despite all the silence, despite everything that had happened, part of their heart still belonged to you. Don't skip. Your soulmate finally lifted their eyes. The room watched carefully. No one expected what happened next. Their voice was calm. But underneath that calmness was an ocean of emotion. They said, "I don't know." The answer confused everyone. People exchanged glances. Someone immediately replied, What do you mean you don't know? Your soulmate looked away. Because the full answer was too dangerous to say out loud. The full answer was this: how can I promise I will love someone else when I never stopped loving the one person who changed everything? But they didn't say that. Not yet. Instead, they remained silent. And that silence spoke louder than any words ever could. Family members began questioning them. Friends tried to encourage them. Some told them that life must move forward. Others insisted that holding on to the past was unhealthy. Yet nobody understood one important thing. Your soulmate wasn't holding on to the past. They were holding on to something unfinished. Something unresolved. Something that still lived inside them. A connection they had never truly been able to replace. The conversation continued. But your soulmate was no longer hearing most of it. Their mind had drifted back through time. Back to memories connected to you. Back to conversations they still remembered word for word. Back to moments they pretended no longer mattered. Back to emotions they had locked away. And one realization became impossible to ignore. No matter how hard they tried to move on, every road somehow led back to you. Don't skip. Hours later, after the gathering ended, your soulmate found themselves alone. The noise was gone. The questions were gone. The expectations were gone. But one thing remained. The question: could you ever love someone else? They sat quietly, thinking, remembering, wondering. And for the first time in a very long time, they allowed themselves to be completely honest. The answer wasn't simple. The answer wasn't comfortable. The answer wasn't practical. But it was real. Because every time they imagined building a future with someone else, one comparison kept appearing. You. Every face became compared to yours. Every conversation became compared to yours. Every connection became compared to the one they once felt with you. And that frightened them. Because it meant the feelings they thought had disappeared were still alive. Maybe hidden. Maybe wounded. Maybe buried beneath layers of time. But alive. The night grew darker. The world became quiet. And your soulmate stared into the distance as a truth finally settled over them. The reason the room had gone silent was not because of the question. The reason the room had gone silent was because everyone sensed that the answer involved someone. Someone whose presence still held power. Someone whose memory still carried weight. Someone who had never fully left their heart. That someone was you. And what your soulmate did next would begin a chain of events that nobody saw coming, because before going to sleep that night, they made a decision they had avoided for far too long. A decision connected directly to you. A decision that would soon bring hidden feelings into the light and force long-buried truths to finally be revealed. Don't skip. The decision your soulmate made that night seemed small on the surface, yet it carried enough emotional weight to change everything. They sat alone long after everyone else had gone to sleep. The house was silent. The lights in neighboring rooms had gone dark. Outside, the world continued moving as if nothing important had happened. But inside their heart, a battle was taking place that could no longer be ignored. For years, they had convinced themselves that time would solve everything. They believed enough distance would erase old feelings. They believed new experiences would eventually replace old memories. They believed that one day they would wake up and think about you less. Then less again. Then eventually not at all. But that day never arrived. Instead, every attempt to move forward seemed to reveal how deeply you had become woven into their soul. That question from earlier continued echoing in their mind. Could you ever love someone else? At first they tried dismissing it. Then they tried distracting themselves. Then they tried convincing themselves they were overthinking. But the harder they fought the question, the stronger the answer became. And the answer terrified them. Because it forced them to admit that they had spent years pretending to be healed while secretly carrying wounds that had never fully closed. They stood up and walked toward a drawer they rarely opened. A drawer filled with forgotten things. Old papers. Old photographs. Old reminders of another time. Most people would have thrown those things away long ago. Your soulmate couldn't. Not because they enjoyed remembering, but because some part of them feared that letting go of those objects would mean letting go of you completely. And despite everything, they weren't ready for that. Don't skip. Their hand trembled slightly as they searched through the drawer. Memories appeared one after another. A message. A photograph. A note. A reminder. Small things that would mean nothing to anyone else. Yet each one carried an entire story. Each one transported them back to moments they thought were buried forever. Suddenly they found themselves smiling. Then moments later they found themselves fighting tears. Because love is strange. Even when people separate. Even when years pass. Even when circumstances change. The heart remembers what logic tries to erase. As they sat on the floor surrounded by memories, another realization arrived. The people at the gathering earlier had assumed they were struggling to move on because they were stubborn. But that wasn't true. The real reason was much deeper. No one else had ever reached the part of their soul that you touched. No one else had ever made them feel seen in quite the same way. No one else had ever left a mark so impossible to remove. And suddenly the room felt too small. The silence felt too loud. The emotions felt too overwhelming. Your soulmate closed their eyes. And that was when something happened. A memory returned. Not just any memory. A memory they had tried desperately to forget. The final conversation connected to you. The words spoken during that moment had followed them for years. At the time, they pretended those words didn't matter. But now they understood the truth. Those words had changed everything. Don't skip. As the memory unfolded, they could hear your voice as clearly as if it were happening in that very moment. Every detail returned. Every emotion returned. Every feeling returned. And suddenly they realized something painful. Back then, they had not fully understood what was being offered to them. Fear had clouded their judgment. Pressure had influenced their decisions. Outside voices had become louder than their own heart. And because of that, opportunities had slipped away. Moments had been lost. Things left unsaid. Now they sat staring into the darkness, wondering how different life might have been if they had listened to their heart instead of everyone else. That thought hurt more than they expected. Because deep down they knew there was no way to rewrite the past. No way to undo mistakes. No way to reclaim lost years. Yet despite knowing that, another thought refused to disappear. What if it wasn't too late? The possibility appeared suddenly. Unexpectedly. Dangerously. What if the story wasn't over? What if distance hadn't destroyed everything? What if the connection still existed somewhere beneath the silence? The questions multiplied. And with every question, their heartbeat grew stronger. For the first time in years, hope quietly entered the room. Not certainty. Not guarantees. Just hope. And sometimes hope is enough to change the direction of an entire life. Don't skip. The next morning, your soulmate appeared normal. At least on the outside. They attended responsibilities. They answered messages. They smiled during conversations. No one suspected what had changed. No one realized they were carrying a secret. The secret was simple. You had become impossible to ignore. Again. Everywhere they looked, reminders appeared. A song. A phrase. A place. A memory. The universe seemed determined to place your name inside their thoughts. And then something happened that they could not explain. While scrolling through old contacts, their eyes stopped. Your name. There it was. Unchanged. Still saved. Still remembered. Still present. The sight of it caused their heart to race. Years of emotions rushed forward all at once. Fear. Regret. Longing. Curiosity. Hope. Every feeling collided together. Their thumb hovered above the screen. One message. One call. One attempt. That was all it would take. Yet it felt impossible. Because reaching out meant risking rejection. Reaching out meant exposing feelings. Reaching out meant admitting that the answer to that question from the gathering was far more powerful than anyone realized. The room had gone silent because they could not imagine loving someone else while a part of them still belonged to you. And now they stood at a crossroads. One path led back into silence. The other path led toward the truth. For several minutes they stared at your name. Unable to move. Unable to think clearly. Unable to look away. Then their phones suddenly vibrated. A new message appeared. And the moment they read it, everything changed. Because the message contained information about you. Information they never expected to hear. Information that would force them to make a choice immediately. A choice that could either reunite two hearts that had been separated by time, or close the door forever. Don't skip. For several seconds, your soulmate simply stared at the message. Their heartbeat became louder than every sound around them. The world seemed to freeze. The words on the screen were short, but their impact was enormous. The message came from someone they had not spoken to in a long time. Someone who unexpectedly knew something about you. At first, your soulmate thought it must be a coincidence. Then they read the message again. And again. And again. No matter how many times they looked at it, the meaning remained the same. The message mentioned your name. Not casually. Not accidentally. Directly. Immediately, every emotion they had spent years controlling threatened to break free. 1,000 questions rushed through their mind. How did this person know about you? Why were they mentioning you now? After all this time, why was your name suddenly appearing everywhere? And most importantly, what did it mean? Their hands trembled slightly as they opened the message completely. What they read next stole the air from their lungs. Because according to the message, someone close to you had recently spoken about a truth that had never been revealed before. A truth connected to the separation. A truth connected to misunderstandings. A truth connected to decisions made years ago. A truth that could change everything your soulmate believed about the past. For a long moment they simply sat there. Unable to move. Unable to process what they were reading. Because if the information was true, then the story they had carried in their heart for years had been incomplete. And incomplete stories often create unnecessary pain. Don't skip. The rest of that day became a blur. People spoke to them. They answered automatically. Meetings happened. Conversations happened. Responsibilities continued. Yet their mind remained somewhere else. Their mind remained focused on one possibility. What if they had been wrong all along? What if certain events had unfolded differently than they believed? What if choices they blamed on you were never actually your choices? The possibility disturbed them. Because accepting it meant facing years of regret. It meant confronting moments they wished they could undo. It meant admitting that some of the pain both of you carried may have been created by silence rather than truth. That evening, they returned home exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. They sat alone once again. The same chair. The same room. The same silence. Yet everything felt different now. Because for the first time in years, they were no longer only remembering you. They were questioning everything they thought they knew about you. And the deeper they thought about it, the more pieces began fitting together. Certain conversations suddenly made sense. Certain reactions suddenly made sense. Certain moments they never understood suddenly became clear. It was like watching a puzzle finally reveal its hidden picture. And the picture shocked them. Because it revealed something they had spent years refusing to believe. You had never stopped caring as much as they assumed. The realization hit them like a storm. Don't skip. Tears formed unexpectedly. Not dramatic tears. Not loud tears. Just quiet tears that arrive when the truth becomes impossible to deny. Your soulmate looked toward the window. Darkness covered the sky. Yet inside their heart, another kind of darkness was finally beginning to lift. For years they had asked themselves why they could never fully move on. Why every new beginning felt incomplete. Why every attempt to replace what was lost eventually failed. Now they understood. The connection had never truly ended. It had simply been buried beneath confusion. And confusion is powerful. Confusion can separate people who belong together. Confusion can convince hearts to remain silent. Confusion can steal years that should have been spent differently. But confusion cannot erase what is real. And that realization changed everything. For the first time since the gathering, your soulmate finally answered the question honestly. Not to family. Not to friends. Not to anyone else. Only to themselves. Could you ever love someone else? They closed their eyes. Thought about every year that had passed. Thought about every attempt to move on. Thought about every comparison. Thought about every memory. Thought about you. Then they whispered the answer. No. The word was barely audible. Yet it carried the weight of an entire lifetime. No. Not because other people were unworthy. Not because life could not continue. But because their heart had never fully left the place where you existed. And finally admitting that truth brought an unexpected sense of peace. Don't skip. Days passed. Then something happened that no one anticipated. News began spreading through family circles. Conversations started taking place. Questions started being asked. Certain people who once opposed the connection began noticing something impossible to ignore. Your soulmate was different. There was a determination in their eyes, a calmness. A certainty. For years they had appeared conflicted. Now they appeared focused. And people wanted to know why. The same relatives who once encouraged them to move on became curious. The same people who asked difficult questions began receiving surprising answers. One evening another family gathering took place. Many of the same faces were present. Many of the same voices filled the room. Eventually someone laughed and brought up the old conversation. The conversation everyone remembered. The question that had created that unforgettable silence. Again someone asked, "Can you finally answer now?" The room grew quiet. Everyone watched. Your soulmate looked around slowly. This time there was no hesitation. No uncertainty. No fear. Just truth. The answer came calmly. Firmly. Clearly, they said, "I spent years trying to convince myself I could." The room became silent. No one interrupted. No one moved. No one looked away. Your soulmate continued. But every road led back to the same person. A chill moved through the room. Several people immediately understood. Others looked shocked. Some looked emotional. Because everyone knew exactly who they meant. And for the first time, your soulmate was no longer hiding it. Don't skip. What happened next became a moment people would remember for years. No arguments followed. No criticism followed. No judgment followed. Because something had changed. The truth carried too much weight. The honesty was too powerful. The emotion was too real. People could see it. People could feel it. And deep inside, many of them realized they had underestimated the depth of the connection all along. Your soulmate wasn't holding on to a fantasy. They weren't refusing to move forward. They weren't trapped in the past. They were connected to something that never truly disappeared.